it's a good time to re-examine how you're living, your lifestyle, and not that changing these things will fix everything, but it will really improve a lot. So the over-exercising obsession with cardio, and this is more of a Gen X thing. We were just so obsessed with cardio, and I would do that above all else. But I also was a very anxious person, so I would just create these impossible exercise schedules. We're all deficient in magnesium, so that is something to really watch out for. And that might be a good idea to start supplementing.
So we tried to kind of
all these tests. I retired. I mean, obviously, but thankfully.
So what's your advice for women that might be going through perimenopause, but they're still looking to conceive? Because I know that, I have had a friend who went through it, and she actually had to go through egg freezing and just a couple of procedures actually that were super painful. And it did take a toll on her. And I think she did have some hormone therapy afterwards as well. Yeah. But what's your advice for these women?
Well, first of all, we don't want to go through this. So I say the first symptom of perimenopause is denial, because, we don't want it. It means we're getting older, and you have to face your mortality and all sorts of things. Right. But just because you're in perimenopause doesn't mean you won't conceive. And in fact, at points, your estrogen is so high that you might even be more likely to conceive. There's, that's something that doctors have mentioned over and over and over, like, do not skip your birth control. So I would I don't have medical advice to give them, but I would ask them to remember that. Like, just because you might have skipped a period, or just because you might have started having these feelings and sensations in your body. Like, I know for me, I didn't have children, and I haven't gotten married. So when, the last thing I wanted to ever hear about was because I still had hope in my early 40s that would happen. Right. And I know it would be like a stab of fear would go through me if I thought that wasn't going to be a possibility. Right. And fear is no way to live. So I just want women to know that that's still an option to you. Right. And it's either the way your friend did it, or you can conceive naturally. I have friends who've given birth in their 40s, no problem. Just try not to live in fear about it, and know that there's a long runway to menopause, right? And your hormones they're there. They're acting up, but
no, but they're there. Yeah. they're letting you know that they're there by acting up. So that's good. Which do you think is more difficult, the perimenopause phase or when you actually enter menopause?
Gosh, it's hard to say because it's so individual. Those early stages of perimenopause were very rough, because I was really doubting my sanity. And then they also forced me to address a number of things that I'm so happy that I addressed. So life has gotten a lot easier for me since I realized that I was in perimenopause, since I started learning about this. That transmenopausal year I found it was wild. I felt wild. Like, I was acting crazy, I think, and I felt a bit crazy. But one thing that I want people to know, and many, many women before me have written about this, is that there is a tremendous emotional and spiritual transition that you go through when you go through menopause. And I am now settling and feeling this, where you know yourself more than you've ever known yourself before. You feel more comfortable and peaceful than you ever felt before, and it starts in snatches. And anyway, for me, and I just bristle when I hear people talking about it in a negative way, because I call it a heroine's journey. Like, you are called to figure out some stuff about yourself. Right. You go through these hormonal changes, and then you get to meet yourself on the other side. And it's been described sort of as when you're young, you're the maiden, and you're really focused outwardly on pleasing everyone else. And you can be a taskmaster to yourself, and others can do it. And then this shift happens where you become like a mother to yourself. And this is also a time you can sort of give back your wisdom to the rest of the world, and you get a new sense. The Japanese call it second spring for a reason. Like, I've seen this over and over in my friends, where they're a bit lost, and then they just start finding like their purpose.
They flourish.
They flourish. And I feel like this now. Like, I'm just literally buzzing with ideas all the time. I've learned about so many new things. I have a newfound confidence, stability, clarity. You can't just sort of lie and accept things that you have accepted for a long time. Yeah. So there is a bit of a shift in your circle and your family, because you find yourself being more honest. But I'd say this part is great.
Yeah, I can see it in your voice. I can see it in your facial expressions. It gives me hope, honestly, because there was a lot of fear mongering, around this whole topic, and I remember my mother going through it, and it was just like this dark phase, and nobody knew how to like handle her, and now that you mention it, like it seems it was way more it was simpler than we thought. Yeah. Basically.
But can I also point out that I am single, so I did a lot of dating between 50 and 53, like more than I'd ever done.
Yeah.
So that's not over either. If you're saying, if you find yourself single, just know that. Like I used to think, oh my gosh, if I don't get married, like there'll be no one left. It's not like that.
Of course.
But I would say, dating in Dubai, the men are not okay either. I was dating between 40 and 50 and they're having a really hard time.
Yeah.
And so, this gets blamed and pinned all on menopause, but it's very hard to separate out what you go through as a human when you hit midlife. You cannot escape the things that have happened to you that you've buried in your vault. They start coming to the surface. You cannot keep them inside, and they will start acting up in ways until you sort of process that pain.
Right.
And I've seen that in men as well. And I've seen men admit to it, and a lot of people will go to therapy, or sometimes they'll start doing destructive things. But, menopause and perimenopause is a big part of it, but we all have to reckon with where we've been and where we want to go. And so,
Yeah, no, I get that. And I think with men as well, I mean, for years it's been taboo. Men's mental health has been taboo. And like men aren't supposed to feel certain emotions because, they're men and they have to be strong. They have to be manly. And it was always taboo, like for men to show emotion, to cry or to go to therapy. Like with women, it started with women a bit earlier than men, I feel, because it wasn't manly.
It still is.
Quote unquote manly.
It
for
still
them to
is.
do that. Yeah.
And one of the things that gets talked about in menopause is like, if this was happening to men, it wouldn't be happening. You see that, you hear that all the time. And I just feel like it's not true because I interviewed a doctor in the UK, Dr. Quentin Uri, who is a specialist in this low T andropause type space. And he said, look, like for men, it's super hard to admit there might be something wrong with their hormones. You can imagine this, right?
Yeah.
So I don't believe that at all. And I just think it's a lazy thing to say. Men would have a very hard time seeking help. And if you can imagine the men in their 40s and 50s admitting that maybe their hormones are off and they don't have it, it's like that's a whole other thing.
They wouldn't even say it. I mean,
they'll just suffer.
Yeah, they won't admit that it's something that exists. You know, so
I've mentioned it to a couple people and they don't like it.
They're like, what are you talking about?
They did not like it.
Exactly. I can tell. So what are some things that women should avoid during their perimenopause phase?
Well, it's a good time to re-examine how you're living, your lifestyle, and not that changing these things will fix everything, but it will really improve a lot. So the over-exercising obsession with cardio, and this is more of a Gen X thing. We were just so obsessed with cardio, and I would do that above all else. But I also was a very anxious person, so I would just create these impossible exercise schedules that I would actually do. Like I'd go spinning and then drive across the city to hot yoga and do that 4 times a week and then be mad at myself because I didn't do it the 5th day,
Yeah.
Those kinds of things will not serve you. And so figuring out, pulling back, strength training is essential to keep us strong and not frail as we get older. And, just re-examining that whole thing, re-examining how you're working, how you're spending your time, how your expectations of yourself and what others are expecting of you. We're all deficient in magnesium, so that is something to really watch out for. And that might be a good idea to start supplementing. Sleep habits. There's a lot of people with really bad sleep habits, looking at your phone before you go to bed. All these things that you could do in your 30s, like no problem, start to become a problem when you're older. I compare this progesterone leaving to like when the tide goes out on a dirty beach and there's a bunch of garbage and it's just like you got to kind of go through, and a lot of people don't want to. They just want to go back to when they perceive things were easier. But if you can sort of sort those things out, and sugar and alcohol are just really not great. And those are things also that we haven't really thought about. You know it's not good for you. But I had really, and a lot of women have intense body pain at certain points in their perimenopause. There's a doctor in the U.S. who's been on my podcast, Dr. Vonda Wright, who has actually named it musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause. This passed, but I was in such pain that I thought maybe I had arthritis. And I went on the Whole30 diet, which just sort of removes everything. You eat whole foods for 30 days. And 10 days in, I woke up and I was like, I'm not in pain anymore. And that was like, okay. sugar is making an alcohol, because I would, like many people, drink on the weekends.
Yeah.
It sounds really unfun if you're not ready, but it's a great time to examine your relationships to some foods and to alcohol.
Oh, sugar. I think like sugar to me is worse than alcohol, to be very honest. Like ever since someone told me it's white poison, that's all I could think of. It is white poison to me. I mean, at least someone that's been through insulin resistance and like borderline pre-diabetic.
Oh,
like
wow,
I think,
I was too in my 40s. Yeah. It's really something to watch. You just
absolutely.
And I don't think you have to get into like, I don't want to eat a banana. You know, I don't want to eat
not to that extent, but
and the way it affects your mood too.
Oh, absolutely.
It is really something when you eat, overload on sugar one day and how you feel the next day, how your face looks, how your clothes, everything.
Yes.
It is, and this is a big debate in social media, as you know, because anytime something comes along that we figure out that's good for us, someone else figures, I can get hits if I tell people that they don't have to do that thing.
Exactly.
And I've interviewed some of those people. I've interviewed someone who is a naturopathic doctor and a dietitian who believes that sugar isn't addictive. And I know isn't. Oh. And so she's always like showing herself eating cake and, have this, that's diet culture, right?
Yeah.
But I was on the podcast, I remember, and I really admire this woman, but I was saying, when I eat a donut, like they brought donuts into our healthy living office that I was working at. It was a healthy website I was working at. And I had one, and then all I could think about were the donuts. All I could think about were the donuts. And when I was even in my 30s, I wouldn't even know that in newsrooms. The cake would come and then I'd be like, what's wrong with me? I want 3 pieces of cake.
Exactly.
And then, there's lots of people trying to tell you that that's not a big deal, but see how you feel.
There's a lot of contradicting information on the internet right now. Like, the people that tell you, ketogenic diets are the way to go, or a carnivore diet, or no, veganism. No, don't go the vegan way. It's very confusing.
It's very, very confusing.
It's a very confusing time, yes. Okay, I'm not going to keep you any longer. I know you're a very busy woman. But what's your advice in general, like to women going through any phase? Be it puberty, like from the beginning of puberty until menopause. Like, what's your advice? For someone that's focusing on that heavily at the moment? I just want to know, what's your advice for mothers who have, young girls who are going to go through that, and people that are going through perimenopause or are in their menopausal stage?
Well, I can say this as a woman who's getting an older woman, and also a journalist, I guess a veteran journalist by now, just who's talked to so many people. I would try and dismantle the notion that other people know more than you do. Yes, other people know in certain specialities know more than you do. But even the greatest experts I've interviewed have tremendous blind spots. And all the people I thought were smarter than me, I look back on my life now and I'm like, all the times I focused outwardly when I had a belief inwardly and I went against myself that was so damaging, and I did it all the time. And so in my 30s, I would get an idea and say it to someone, and then some people always say that's a bad idea. It doesn't. So the people around you particularly don't know any more than you, and often are not as smart.
Are not as well informed,
right?
Of course.
And so that knowing, that inner knowing, that gets really strong when you go through menopause. That is like almost like I've been joking that I'm almost psychic or intuitive or clairsentient or something, because I'm starting to really feel other people's emotions, and so just work on that. Work on like believing in yourself and what you know, because we are given a wisdom internally, and we're kind of broken of it by every external factor that wants you to always look outside yourself for the answers and for comfort and for whatever. But I do believe you have it all inside you, and I believe you know, or you can find out. And never just go with one person. Like if you're going to follow experts or learn about something, like cast a wide net. That's what I always used to say to journalists when I became an editor. Cast a wide net.
Right. Always get that second and third opinion, and like the information from several people rather than just one source. We do that with research. When we were in high school, when you write a paper, you would get different sources, so you might as well apply that to your
1,000%. And just look at perimenopause and menopause. On one side is the mainstream medical system that's telling you this is all about estrogen and just replace the estrogen and maybe some progesterone and testosterone here.
Maybe.
And then there's people over here saying this is really about this progesterone is like a big part of it. I find that, and there's so many gaps like that in this space. I find that amazing, and like not in a good way.
Yeah, I know.